Achieving any goal isn't about hoping things will work out or wishing for better luck. It's about following a set of principles that brings you closer to the results you want. Over the years, I've developed a 5-step process that will take you from where you are to where you want to be, no matter what your goal is. These steps are simple, but don't mistake simple for easy. They require discipline, focus, and persistence. But if you follow them, I guarantee you'll get closer to your goals than you ever imagined. The first step to achieving any goal is clarity. Without clarity, it's impossible to make progress. How many people are out there right now saying they want more out of life, but they don't know exactly what that looks like? They know they want something different, something better, but they've never taken the time to define it. They say, I want more money, or I want to be successful. But what does that mean? How much money? What kind of success? Without specificity, without being clear about what you want, you'll find yourself chasing after vague ideas and never quite reaching them. Clarity is the foundation of all success. It's like setting a target. If you don't know exactly what the target looks like, how can you hit it? You can't. You'll miss every time. So the first thing you need to do is get crystal clear on your goal. Not just in general terms, but in specific, measurable terms. Take some time to ask yourself, what exactly do I want? If it's financial freedom, define it. Does that mean you want to earn $100,000 a year? $500,000. Or maybe it's not about the money, but about the lifestyle. Do you want to work less and spend more time with your family? What does that look like? How many hours a week do you want to work? How much free time do you want to have? The clearer you can be about your goal, the more power you give yourself to achieve it. Once you've got that clarity, you need to visualize it. Close your eyes and see yourself in possession of that goal. Picture what your life looks like once you've achieved it. What are you doing? How are you feeling? Who are you with? This mental picture becomes the blueprint for your success. Your mind starts to work toward what it can clearly see. What the mind can visualize, it can bring to reality. But if the picture is blurry, if the goal is vague, your mind has nothing to aim for. Years ago, I met a young man who came to one of my seminars. He was ambitious, full of energy, but he was all over the place. He told me he wanted to be rich, but when I asked him how much money he wanted to make, he didn't have an answer. He hadn't thought about it. He just knew he wanted more. I told him, you've got to define that. You can't hit a target you can't see. So he went home and did just that. He wrote down a number, $200,000 by the end of the year. And you know what happened? Once he got clear on that number, he started making decisions that aligned with that goal. He focused his energy, his time, and his resources on opportunities that would bring him closer to that $200,000 mark. And by the end of the year, he hit it. That's the power of clarity. So if you haven't already, sit down and write out your goal in detail. Be specific. Be clear. The more specific you are, the more focused you'll be. And the more focused you are, the faster you'll make progress. And once you have clarity, the second step is to create a plan. A goal without a plan is just a dream. It's not real until you've mapped out the steps to get there. Too often, people set a goal and stop there. They say, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to double my income, but they never take the time to figure out how they're going to make it happen. And without a plan, you're just wandering around hoping for the best. A plan is like a roadmap. It shows you the path from where you are to where you want to be. And here's the thing. Your plan doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to have every single step figured out before you start. In fact, if you wait until you have every step figured out, you'll never begin. The beauty of a plan is that it evolves. You adjust it as you go. But what's important is that you have a starting point, a framework that gives you direction. Think of it like this. When you decide to take a road trip across the country, you don't need to know every single turn from the moment you start. You just need to know the main highways, the general route, and then you can adjust for traffic, weather, or unexpected detours as you drive. But you still need that initial map to get started. So once you've got clarity on your goal, the next question is, how do I get there? Break it down into smaller steps. Let's say your goal is to lose 20 pounds. Instead of focusing on the big number, create a plan where you lose 1 or 2 pounds a week. Ask yourself, what changes do I need to make in my diet? How often will I exercise? What resources do I need to help me stay on track? Do I need a trainer, a workout buddy, or a meal plan? Get specific with your plan, just like you did with your goal. The key to a good plan is that it's actionable and realistic. Too often, people make grand plans that are impossible to stick with. They say, I'm going to work out 2 hours every day, give up all sugar, and run a marathon by the end of the month. But that's not sustainable. A plan needs to be something you can follow consistently over time. It's better to start small and build momentum than to set yourself up for burnout by doing too much too soon. Maybe your goal is to start a business. Well, how do you turn that dream into reality? Start with the basics. What kind of business do you want to create? Who are your customers? What do you need to learn before you can launch? Break it down step by step. First, maybe you research your market. Then you create a business plan. Then you look into securing funding or saving money. It doesn't matter how small the steps seem, as long as they move you forward. When I was starting out, I didn't know every step to becoming successful, but I did know that I had to keep learning and improving. So I created a plan to read a certain number of books each month. I set aside time to meet with mentors, and I made sure to apply what I learned every day. My plan wasn't perfect, and I adjusted it as I grew, but it gave me the structure I needed to stay focused. Now remember, flexibility is key. Life happens. Things don't always go according to plan, and that's okay. If something doesn't work out, you adjust. You revise the plan, you try a different approach, but you don't give up on the goal. That's why it's so important to review your plan regularly. Set aside time each week to check in. Are you making progress? Do you need to adjust your actions? Sometimes you'll need to pivot. Maybe a new opportunity presents itself, or maybe you realize you need to learn a new skill to move forward. Whatever it is, be open to adapting, but always keep your eye on the goal. Next, the fourth step is accountability. This is something most people overlook, but it's crucial if you want to stay on track. When you're accountable to someone else, whether it's a friend, a mentor, or a coach, you're far more likely to follow through on your commitments. Why? Because accountability creates a sense of responsibility. It adds a layer of external pressure that keeps you moving forward, even when you don't feel like it. Here's the thing about goals. It's easy to make promises to yourself, but it's just as easy to break them. You tell yourself you'll start working on your goal tomorrow, but tomorrow comes and you put it off again. When no one is watching, it's easy to let yourself off the hook. But when you've got someone holding you accountable, someone who's expecting you to show up and deliver, you're far less likely to quit. Let me tell you about a time when accountability made a huge difference in my own life. I was working on a major project and I knew it was going to take months of consistent effort to see it through. I didn't want to risk getting distracted or losing focus, so I enlisted the help of a mentor. Every week, we'd sit down and review my progress. Just knowing that I had to report to someone else kept me on track. I didn't want to show up empty-handed, so I pushed myself to make progress every single week. Now, accountability doesn't have to be formal. You don't need to hire a coach or find a mentor if that's not an option. You can simply find a friend or a colleague who's working on their own goals, and you hold each other accountable. Set up a system where you check in regularly, share your progress, and encourage each other to stay on track. And if you can't find someone to hold you accountable, hold yourself accountable. One of the best ways to do this is by tracking your progress. Keep a journal, make a checklist, or create a habit tracker, whatever works for you. But make sure you're keeping yourself honest. When you can see your progress or lack thereof in black and white, it's a powerful motivator to keep going. Remember, accountability keeps you moving when your motivation fades. It adds structure to the process and prevents you from falling off track. So, after you've gained clarity, created a plan, and started taking action, make sure you've got a system in place to stay accountable. Now, the final step to achieving any goal is persistence. This is the step that separates those who succeed from those who fall short. Most people give up too soon. They set a goal, they make a plan, they take action. But when things get tough, when they hit that first roadblock or face their first setback, they throw in the towel. But persistence is what turns dreams into reality. It's the willingness to keep going, no matter how hard it gets. Persistence is what separates the winners from the quitters. It's the ability to keep going, to keep pushing, even when things get tough, even when the progress seems slow, or when setbacks appear. Most people don't fail because their goals are too big, or because they're not capable. They fail because they give up too soon. They give up at the first sign of difficulty. They let temporary obstacles become permanent barriers. But persistence is what pushes you through those tough times. How many people do you know who started something, maybe with all the excitement and energy in the world, but then they hit a rough patch and stopped? They never made it to the other side. Now, what if they had just kept going for another week, another month, another year? What if they had pushed just a little bit harder? Success doesn't come to those who try once or twice and give up. It comes to those who stick with it, those who are willing to fail, learn from their failures, and try again. Look at Colonel Sanders. He wasn't an overnight success. In fact, he didn't start KFC until he was in his 60s. Before that, his life was full of setbacks and failures. He worked as a farmhand, a streetcar conductor, a railroad fireman, and even had a law practice that failed. At one point, he was running a small service station in Kentucky where he served his now famous fried chicken. But here's the kicker. When he tried to franchise his recipe, he was rejected over 1,000 times. That's right. 1,000 times. Now imagine that. Colonel Sanders, a man in his 60s, with very little to his name, driving across the country, knocking on doors, trying to sell his chicken recipe, and getting turned down over and over again. Most people would have given up after a handful of rejections. But not the Colonel. He believed in his product, and he was persistent. He kept going no matter how many times he was rejected. Finally, after years of persistence, one restaurant owner said, yes. That was the beginning of what would become a global brand. KFC now operates in over 100 countries, but none of it would have happened if Colonel Sanders hadn't kept going after those 1,000 rejections. That's what persistence looks like. It's the determination to keep moving forward, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Colonel Sanders didn't let failure define him. He used each rejection as a stepping stone to success. He didn't quit just because things weren't working out right away. He kept knocking on doors, adjusting his approach, and eventually found the breakthrough he needed. And that's the power of persistence, staying committed even when everything seems to be telling you to quit. The key to persistence is to understand that setbacks are not permanent. They're temporary. They're part of the process. Every great success story is filled with failures, roadblocks, and disappointments. But the difference between those who succeed and those who don't is that the successful ones keep going. They view setbacks as lessons, as opportunities to grow. They don't let them stop them. They keep moving forward. Here's a little secret about persistence. The moment you feel like giving up, the moment when everything seems the hardest, that's usually when you're closest to a breakthrough. Most people quit right before they're about to succeed. It's like the story of the man who was digging for gold. He'd been digging for weeks, months even, without finding anything. He was exhausted, frustrated, and ready to give up. So he put down his shovel and walked away. But what he didn't realize was that he was just 3 feet away from hitting the gold. 3 feet. If he had just kept digging for one more day, he would have struck it rich. But he quit too soon. That's why persistence is so important, because you never know how close you are to success. You never know when that breakthrough is going to come. So how do you develop persistence? How do you keep going when the going gets tough? The first thing you need to do is stay connected to your why. Why did you set this goal in the first place? What's at stake for you? When you're clear on your why, when you understand the deeper reason behind your goal, it gives you the fuel to keep going, even when you don't feel like it. Maybe your goal is to provide a better life for your family. Maybe it's to prove to yourself that you can do it. Maybe it's to live a healthier, longer life. Whatever it is, keep that reason in front of you at all times. When things get hard, remind yourself why you're doing it. That will give you the strength to keep going. Another important part of persistence is to break your goal down into smaller milestones. If you're always focused on the big goal, it can feel overwhelming and you might lose motivation. But when you break it down into smaller, more manageable steps, it becomes easier to keep going. Celebrate those small wins. Each time you hit a milestone, no matter how small, give yourself credit. That progress keeps you motivated, and it reminds you that you're moving in the right direction. But here's the thing. You do need to be flexible when it comes to persistence. Being persistent doesn't mean being stubborn. It doesn't mean you keep doing the same thing over and over again, even when it's not working. Persistence means staying committed to the goal, but being flexible in your approach. If one strategy isn't working, try another. If you hit a wall, find a way around it. Be willing to adjust your plan, but never give up on the goal. I'm telling you, there were plenty of times in my career when things didn't go according to plan. I remember early on when I was trying to get my speaking business off the ground, and I ran into one obstacle after another. I had financial setbacks. I had speaking engagements that didn't go well. I had people tell me that I wouldn't make it. But I kept going. I adjusted my approach when needed. I learned from my mistakes, and I stayed focused on the goal. And because I was persistent, eventually, things started to fall into place. That's the power of persistence. Now, I want to leave you with one final thought about persistence. Persistence isn't just about grit and determination. It's also about faith. It's about having faith in yourself, faith in the process, and faith that if you keep doing the right things, the results will come. You might not see the results right away, but if you trust the process and stay committed, they will come. Have faith that your hard work will pay off, that your efforts will be rewarded, that faith is what will carry you through the tough times. So, the first thing you need is clarity. Know exactly what you want. Define your goal in precise, measurable terms. Second, create a plan. Break your goal down into actionable steps and create a roadmap to get there. Third, take action. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Just start. Even small actions taken consistently will lead to progress. Fourth, stay accountable. Find someone or something to hold you responsible for staying on track. And finally, be persistent. Keep going, no matter how many obstacles you face. Stay committed to the goal and don't give up. These 5 steps aren't just principles, they're a way of life. If you follow them, there's no limit to what you can achieve. Whether it's a personal goal, a financial goal, a health goal, or a career goal, these steps will take you from where you are to where you want to be. So, get clear, make a plan, take action, stay accountable, and be persistent. Success is within your reach. You just have to go after it. There are moments in life when silence is far more powerful than words. You see, knowing when to speak and when to remain silent is a skill, a discipline, and often a sign of wisdom. There are situations where your words, no matter how well-intentioned or logical, can make things worse. That's when silence becomes your greatest tool, your ally in navigating life's complexities. Think about it. When someone criticizes you in anger, what's your first reaction? For most people, it's to defend themselves. It's natural. We want to set the record straight, explain our side of the story, maybe even argue back. But responding in that moment when emotions are high rarely leads to resolution. In fact, it usually escalates the situation. Why? Because when people are angry, they're not thinking rationally. Their minds are clouded by emotion, and they aren't in a place to listen or understand. Years ago, I had a colleague who was furious over a misunderstanding. He stormed into my office, slammed the door, and started unleashing a torrent of accusations. Now everything in me wanted to respond, to tell him he was wrong, to defend my actions. But I knew that in that moment, nothing I said would matter. His mind was already made up. So I stayed silent. I listened to every word, not reacting, not interrupting. And after a while, he ran out of steam. His anger had no fuel to keep burning. When he finished, he left the room without me saying a single word. Later that day, he came back, calm and collected, and we had a proper conversation. He apologized for his outburst, and we were able to resolve the issue without any lingering resentment. If I had jumped in during his angry tirade, it would have only escalated the conflict. But because I chose silence, I let the situation de-escalate. And in the end, it saved the relationship. This is a key principle in life. When someone is criticizing you in anger, don't feel the need to respond immediately. Silence can give both of you space to cool down, to think clearly, and to approach the situation with a level head. By staying silent, you maintain control over yourself, over your emotions, and ultimately, over the situation. And that control is a sign of strength, not weakness. I once heard it said, you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. That's powerful. Just because someone is angry or upset with you doesn't mean you need to engage in a battle of words. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. And here's the thing, silence in these moments doesn't mean you're agreeing with what's being said. It simply means you're choosing not to react in a way that will add more fuel to the fire. Imagine you're standing in front of a bonfire. The flames are high, the heat intense. Now you have two options. You can throw more wood onto the fire, making it blaze even hotter, or you can let the flames burn themselves out. That's what silence does. It allows the flames of anger to die down on their own. Words, on the other hand, can act like wood, feeding the fire, making it grow until it's out of control. But let me be clear. Silence isn't always about not speaking at all. Sometimes it's about timing. When the moment is right, when the other person has calmed down, that's when you can have a meaningful conversation. That's when you can address the issues at hand with clarity and understanding. But that moment won't come if you jump into the fray too soon. You've got to let the storm pass before you can navigate through it. Another critical time to be silent is when you're caught up in excitement. You're feeling great. Everything's going your way. And you're tempted to make promises. You're on top of the world. And it feels like you can accomplish anything. So you start committing to things left and right. You tell people you'll do this, you'll help with that, you'll take on this new project. In the heat of the moment, it all seems possible. But here's the danger. Promises made in the midst of excitement are often promises that are hard to keep. Enthusiasm can make you overestimate your capacity. And when that initial rush fades, you're left with a mountain of commitments that you're not sure how to fulfill. The problem is, when you don't keep your promises, it doesn't just affect your credibility with others. It affects your credibility with yourself. I've seen this happen time and time again. Someone gets fired up about a new opportunity, a new goal, and in their excitement, they commit to too much. Maybe they promise to help with a project that's outside their expertise, or they agree to take on more responsibility than they can handle. And at first it feels great, but as time goes on, the reality of those commitments sets in. They find themselves overwhelmed, stressed, and struggling to keep up. Eventually, they have to backtrack on their promises, and that's when the real damage is done. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be excited. Excitement is a wonderful thing. It's the fuel that drives us forward, that gets us moving toward our goals. But excitement, like fire, needs to be managed. If you let it burn out of control, it can consume you. That's why, in moments of high excitement, it's important to be silent. Don't make promises or commitments in the heat of the moment. Give yourself time to think, to reflect, to consider what's realistic. I remember a young man who came up to me after one of my seminars. He was so excited about everything he'd learned, so inspired by the possibilities ahead of him. He told me he was going to change his life, start a business, quit his job, run a marathon, and learn a new language, all in the next 6 months. I admired his enthusiasm, but I also knew he was setting himself up for failure. He was making promises to himself in the heat of the moment, without taking the time to consider the reality of what he was committing to. A year later, I saw him again. He was discouraged, burnt out, and frustrated. He hadn't accomplished any of the things he'd set out to do, and he felt like a failure. The problem wasn't his ambition or his goals. The problem was that he'd made too many promises when he was caught up in excitement. He hadn't given himself time to think things through, to plan, to prioritize. So the next time you feel that rush of excitement, remember to be silent. Give yourself space to let the excitement settle. Don't make promises right away. Take time to consider what's realistic, what's achievable, and what's truly important. Silence in those moments isn't about dampening your enthusiasm. It's about channeling it in a way that sets you up for success, not disappointment. Here's another time when silence is the best course of action, when you don't have all the facts. Now, this is a big one. How many times have you seen someone jump into a conversation, offer their opinion, or give advice without knowing the whole story? It happens all the time. People love to talk, love to share their thoughts, even when they don't fully understand what's going on. And more often than not, this leads to misunderstanding, confusion, and sometimes even conflict. I learned early on that it's better to be silent and listen than to speak when you don't have all the information. I remember a business meeting many years ago where one of the executives started offering solutions to a problem before he fully understood what the problem was. He jumped in with all sorts of ideas, eager to show his expertise. But he hadn't taken the time to ask the right questions, to gather the necessary information. As a result, his suggestions were completely off base, and the meeting went in circles for far longer than it needed to, all because he didn't be silent. When you don't have all the facts, silence is a sign of wisdom. It shows that you're willing to listen, to learn, to understand before you speak. And when you do finally speak, your words will carry more weight because they're grounded in knowledge, not assumption. And here's another one that we cannot neglect: the power of remaining silent when you don't have all the facts. You see, in many situations, people rush to fill the silence with their opinions, advice, or assumptions. There's an almost instinctual need to say something, anything, to prove they're engaged, to demonstrate their knowledge, or simply to avoid the discomfort of silence. But here's where the real wisdom comes into play. Silence allows you to gather more information, to see the situation from different angles, and to avoid unnecessary conflict. I remember a time when I was working with a team of executives on a major project. One of the newer members of the team was eager to make his mark. In a meeting, he was quick to offer solutions, quick to jump in with ideas, even though he hadn't fully understood the scope of the problem. Now his enthusiasm was commendable, but his lack of information was dangerous. His suggestions, though well-intentioned, were not relevant to the actual issue we were facing. The rest of the team had to spend extra time re-explaining the situation, and in the end, the entire meeting was less productive because of it. Had he chosen to be silent, to listen first, he could have offered something far more valuable. This isn't about staying silent forever. It's about being silent until you know enough to contribute meaningfully. There's a great saying: it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. That's a bit humorous, but there's a lot of truth in it. The less you say when you're unsure, the wiser you seem. But the benefit of silence when you don't have all the facts goes beyond just avoiding embarrassment. It helps you build credibility. When people know that you speak only when you're well informed, they'll listen more carefully when you do speak. Your words will carry more weight because they're rooted in understanding. You'll become someone whose opinion is trusted, not because you always have something to say, but because when you do say something, it's worth hearing. Another situation where silence is crucial: when someone else is sharing something important, something personal, something emotional. This is where a lot of people make a mistake. When someone opens up about their struggles, their fears, or their pain, the instinct is often to jump in with advice, to try to fix the problem, to say something that will make them feel better. But here's the thing. Sometimes people don't need your words. They don't need your advice. They just need you to listen. I learned this lesson the hard way early in my career. I was mentoring a young man who was going through a difficult time in his life. He came to me pouring out his heart, telling me about the challenges he was facing, the fears he had, and the uncertainty that was weighing him down. And what did I do? I immediately jumped in with advice. I told him what he needed to do, how he needed to think, and what steps he should take. I thought I was helping him. But here's what I didn't realize at the time. He wasn't looking for advice. He wasn't looking for a solution. He was looking for someone to listen, to acknowledge what he was feeling, to sit with him in that moment of vulnerability. By jumping in with my words, I missed an opportunity to connect with him on a deeper level. I missed the chance to offer the kind of support that only silence can provide. You see, silence in these moments isn't about doing nothing. It's about being fully present. It's about showing the other person that you're there with them, that you're listening, that you're creating space for them to express themselves. And sometimes that's all they need. Just the act of being heard can be incredibly powerful. It can provide comfort, reassurance, and healing in a way that words often can't. When someone is sharing something personal or emotional, resist the urge to fill the space with your own thoughts, opinions, or advice. Instead, offer them the gift of silence. Let them speak, let them share, and let your silence be a sign of your attention, your empathy, your understanding. Now, silence in these situations also teaches us something important about our own needs. How many times have you found yourself sharing something difficult with someone, only to have them immediately offer advice or solutions? How did that make you feel? Often it can feel dismissive, like they're not truly hearing you. They may mean well, but by jumping in too quickly, they miss the depth of what you're trying to communicate. That's why silence is so powerful. It allows the other person to fully express themselves without interruption, without judgment, without the pressure of having to listen to your response. And in doing so, it shows them that they matter, that their feelings, their experiences, their story is important enough for you to simply listen. Another important time to be silent is when you're about to make a major decision. Too often, people rush into decisions, speaking their mind, declaring their intentions before they've had a chance to fully consider the consequences. But silence, taking the time to reflect, to think, to weigh the pros and cons, can save you from making a decision you'll later regret. I've seen this happen in business all too often. Someone gets an idea, and in their excitement, they immediately start talking about it, sharing it with others, committing to it before they've fully thought it through. And what happens? They realize later that they didn't consider all the angles, didn't foresee the challenges, didn't think about the long-term implications. But by that point, they've already spoken their intentions, and now they're locked into a course of action that may not be the best one. That's why silence is so valuable when you're on the brink of a major decision. It gives you the space to think, to gather more information, to consider different perspectives. It prevents you from rushing into something based on impulse or emotion. And when you finally do speak, when you finally do make that decision, you can do so with confidence, knowing that you've thought it through, that you've weighed the options, that you're making the best choice. I remember a time early in my career when I was presented with a business opportunity. It seemed like a great idea at first glance, exciting, full of potential. I was tempted to jump in right away, to say yes, to commit. But something told me to pause, to remain silent, to give myself time to think. And I'm glad I did. After doing more research, after talking to a few trusted advisors, I realized that the opportunity wasn't as great as it seemed. There were hidden risks, challenges I hadn't considered, and in the end, I decided not to pursue it. Had I spoken too soon, had I made a decision in the heat of the moment, I would have found myself in a difficult situation later on. This is the power of silence. It gives you time to reflect, time to gather more information, time to consider the long-term implications of your decisions. And that time, that silence, can make all the difference between success and failure, between making a wise decision and a hasty one. But here's something else to consider. Silence in decision-making isn't just about what's happening on the outside. It's also about what's happening on the inside. When you give yourself the gift of silence, you create space for clarity. You allow your mind to settle, your thoughts to organize themselves, your intuition to speak. And that inner clarity is often what leads to the best decisions. So the next time you're faced with a major decision, resist the urge to speak too soon. Resist the temptation to commit before you've had time to think it through. Instead, be silent. Give yourself the time and space to reflect. And when you do speak, when you do make your decision, you'll do so from a place of confidence, wisdom, and clarity. And there's one more crucial moment where silence is golden: when you're in the presence of greatness, when you're around someone who has achieved what you aspire to, someone whose wisdom and experience far surpasses your own. That's a time to listen more and talk less. So many people make the mistake of trying to impress those who are further along the path. They try to show what they know, to prove their worth through words. But what they don't realize is that true learning comes through listening. When you find yourself in the presence of someone with great wisdom or experience, and the natural inclination might be to show them how much you know, to talk about your own ideas, or to share your accomplishments. But here's a key truth. Those who have truly achieved greatness aren't impressed by how much you can talk. They're impressed by how much you're willing to learn. And the only way to learn from those who have walked a path you haven't is through silence and listening. I remember one of my early mentors, Mr. Schoff. Mr. Schoff was a man of tremendous success, and every time I was around him, I was eager to learn. But in those moments, I didn't do the talking. I let him speak. I soaked up every word he said. Mr. Schoff had something I wanted: success, wisdom, understanding. And I knew that if I spent my time trying to impress him with what I knew, I'd miss out on what he could teach me. I wasn't there to show off my knowledge. I was there to absorb his. Here's what you've got to understand. Greatness doesn't need to be acknowledged. Those who have achieved it don't need you to validate them by telling them how much you know. They already know what they've accomplished. What they appreciate, what they respect, is the humility of someone who knows when to be quiet and listen. There's a time for asking questions, but the deeper questions come when you've already listened intently, when you've absorbed the foundational wisdom that's being offered. And I'm telling you, the lessons I learned from Mr. Schoff didn't just come from the words he spoke. They came from his demeanor, from the way he handled himself in business, from his attitude toward life. If I had been busy talking, if I had been trying to impress him, I would have missed all of that. But because I was silent, because I listened, I was able to learn things that went far beyond what he said. His actions, his presence, his way of thinking, it all spoke volumes. But I only received those lessons because I was willing to be quiet and let the greatness around me do the teaching. Think about this. When you speak, you're only repeating what you already know. But when you listen, you're opening yourself up to learn something new. That's why silence in the presence of greatness is so important. It's an opportunity to expand your mind, to gain insights that you couldn't get on your own. And the only way to seize that opportunity is to stop talking and start listening. This principle applies not just to individuals, but to any situation where you're in the presence of something larger than yourself. It could be a profound idea, a complex challenge, or a significant event. Silence allows you to fully absorb the gravity of the moment. It's in those quiet moments that you gain perspective, that you see the bigger picture, that you come to understand things in a deeper way. Silence in the presence of greatness also teaches you humility. It reminds you that no matter how much you know, there's always more to learn. It puts you in the mindset of a student. And that's one of the most powerful places you can be. When you approach life as a student, when you're willing to be quiet and learn from those who have gone before you, the world opens up to you in ways you never imagined. I've often said, the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. And that realization doesn't come through speaking. It comes through listening, through observing, through taking in the wisdom and experience of others. Greatness is often quiet, subtle, and it reveals itself to those who are patient enough to sit in silence and absorb its lessons. Now let's consider another scenario where silence is invaluable when you're being provoked. This one is tough. There will be times in your life when people deliberately try to get under your skin, when they push your buttons, when they say or do things just to get a reaction out of you. Maybe it's out of jealousy. Maybe it's insecurity on their part. Or maybe it's just their nature to be confrontational. Whatever the reason, you'll face moments when people will provoke you, hoping you'll respond in anger or frustration. In those moments, the temptation to react can be overwhelming. You feel your heart rate rise, your face gets hot, and you just want to say something, anything, to defend yourself or to put the other person in their place. But here's the truth. Reacting in those moments almost never serves you well. When you react to provocation, you're giving the other person exactly what they want. You're playing into their hands. And more often than not, you'll say or do something that you'll later regret. I had a mentor once who told me, Jim, when someone tries to pull you into their storm, you don't have to go. And that's the essence of silence when you're being provoked. Silence in these moments isn't about weakness or submission. It's about strength. It's about having the self-control to remain calm, to rise above the situation, to refuse to let someone else dictate your emotions. I've seen it time and again in business, in relationships, in everyday life. Someone says something hurtful or insulting, hoping to get a rise out of you. And the person who remains silent, who doesn't take the bait, is the one who walks away with their dignity intact. Silence in those moments is a sign of maturity. It shows that you're not swayed by the negativity of others, that you're in control of your own emotions and reactions. And here's another thing to keep in mind. When you remain silent in the face of provocation, it often disarms the other person. They're expecting a reaction. They're ready for a fight. But when you don't engage, when you don't give them what they're looking for, it throws them off balance. It forces them to confront their own behavior, their own motives. Silence becomes a mirror that reflects their negativity back at them. I remember a story about a businessman I once worked with. He was constantly dealing with a competitor who loved to provoke him. This competitor would spread rumors, criticize him publicly, and do whatever he could to get a reaction. And for a while, my friend would respond. He'd defend himself. He'd argue back. He'd let the competitor drag him into a verbal sparring match. But it didn't help. In fact, it made things worse. One day, my friend decided to try a different approach. The next time his competitor tried to provoke him, he stayed silent. He didn't respond. He didn't acknowledge the insults. He simply went about his business. and something interesting happened. The competitor lost his power without a reaction to feed off of. His provocations fell flat. Over time, he stopped trying to provoke my friend altogether, and my friend's reputation grew stronger because he was seen as someone who wasn't easily rattled. That's the power of silence in the face of provocation. It shows strength, it shows self-control, and it ultimately gives you the upper hand. Silence allows you to rise above the fray, to maintain your composure, and to walk away with your dignity intact. But here's an important point. Silence doesn't mean you're suppressing your emotions. It doesn't mean you're bottling up your feelings or avoiding the issue. It means you're choosing not to react in the heat of the moment. You're giving yourself time to process, to think, to decide how you want to respond, if you even need to respond at all. Silence creates a buffer, a space where you can regain control of your emotions and make decisions from a place of clarity rather than impulsiveness. And that's one of the greatest lessons of silence. It gives you time to think, time to reflect, time to regain your balance. In a world that often pressures us to react immediately, to speak without thinking, to respond without fully understanding, silence is a gift. It allows you to step back, to breathe, to regain your composure before you take action. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where someone is trying to provoke you, where they're pushing your buttons and hoping for a reaction, remember the power of silence. Don't feel the need to engage. Don't let them pull you into their storm. Stay calm, stay silent, and let your silence speak for you. You'll be amazed at how much power that can give you. And let's not forget that silence in all of these situations isn't just about avoiding conflict or staying out of trouble. It's about cultivating inner peace. It's about knowing that you don't have to react to everything that happens around you. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. You don't have to respond to every criticism, every provocation, every challenge. Silence teaches you that sometimes the best response is no response at all. And when you master the art of silence, when you know when to speak and when to stay quiet, you'll find that you're not just navigating life more effectively. You're also living with more peace, more wisdom, and more strength. You got to make sure you don't have a weak mind. It's easy to overlook, but it's one of the most dangerous traps in life. We can be so concerned with physical strength, with how we look on the outside, that we forget the inside is where the real battle happens. And if you're not careful, if you're not deliberate in training your mind, you'll develop habits that weaken you from within. You won't even realize it until you're facing a challenge and your mind gives up before your body ever does. The first habit that will ruin all chances at success is complaining. Now, complaining is one of those things that seems harmless. In fact, it's so common that we don't even notice when we're doing it. We complain about the weather, the government, our neighbors, our jobs. But here's the thing. Every time you complain, you focus on the problem, not the solution. And where your attention goes, your energy flows. So if you're always pointing out what's wrong, what's not working, you're draining your mental energy. You're programming yourself to see life in terms of obstacles instead of opportunities. It's like you're giving yourself permission to stay stuck. Complaining is a passive activity. It gives the illusion of action, but it doesn't change a thing. It weakens your resolve because it reinforces a mindset of helplessness. Strong people don't waste their time on complaints. They look at the same situation, the same problem, and they ask, what can I do about it? That's a shift in mentality that builds strength. Next, stop making excuses. Now, excuses, they feel comfortable, don't they? They let us off the hook. We say things like, I didn't have enough time, or I don't have the right resources, or it's not my fault. But I'm telling you something important. Excuses are dangerous because they give away your power. When you make an excuse, you're saying the control is out of your hands, that something external is responsible for your failure. You're placing the blame somewhere else. And here's what happens over time. You stop believing in your own ability to change your circumstances. You convince yourself that your situation is fixed, that you're a victim of life instead of the creator of it. But strong people, they take full responsibility. They know that life isn't always fair, but they also know that they're the ones steering the ship, no matter the storm. If you get in the habit of making excuses, you're weakening your mind. You're training your mind to find reasons why you can't, instead of finding ways that you can. Next, stop comparing yourself to others. You start measuring your worth against someone else's success. But I'm telling you, the moment you start comparing yourself to others, you lose sight of your own journey. You see, everyone is on their own path. What works for someone else might not work for you, and that's okay. But when you constantly compare, you're always chasing something that's outside of yourself. And that's exhausting. You'll never be satisfied because there will always be someone who's ahead of you, someone who's doing things differently or seemingly better. Mental strength comes from focusing on your own progress. The only person you should be competing with is the person you were yesterday. When you compare yourself to others, you're distracted from your own growth, and that weakens you. It erodes your self-confidence because you're playing by someone else's rules instead of your own. And I'm telling you, no one ever became strong by following someone else's path. Next, don't try to be perfect. Now, being perfect is one of those things that sounds good in theory. You want everything to be just right. You have high standards. But here's where it becomes a problem. Perfectionism is rooted in fear. The fear of making a mistake. The fear of being less than perfect. And when you're afraid, you hesitate. You wait, you plan and plan, but you never act. You never take that first step because you're waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect conditions, the perfect you. But I'm telling you, perfection doesn't exist. Life is messy. Success is messy. And if you wait for perfection, you'll never get started. You'll be stuck in a loop of inaction. Mental strength comes from embracing imperfection. It comes from knowing that you're going to make mistakes, that things aren't always going to go according to plan, and that's okay. You learn from it. You adjust. You grow. But if you demand perfection from yourself, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're putting an impossible standard in front of you. And when you inevitably fall short, you'll feel defeated. Strong people, they understand that progress is better than perfection. They know that it's better to take imperfect action than to take no action at all. Because action builds momentum, and momentum builds confidence. Perfectionism, on the other hand, keeps you stuck, and over time, it makes you mentally fragile. Next, you got to stop living in the past. We've all done it. We replay old memories, old mistakes, old hurts, thinking that maybe if we go over them enough times, we can change what happened. But here's the truth. The past is gone. It's done. And the more time you spend living in the past, the less energy you have for the present. The past can be a heavy weight to carry, especially if it's filled with regret or pain. But strong people, they know that the past is a place of reference, not residence. You can visit it, you can learn from it, but you don't live there. When you dwell on the past, you're giving up control over your present. You're letting old wounds dictate your future. And that weakens you because you're constantly looking backward instead of forward. It's like trying to drive a car while only staring in the rearview mirror. You're going to crash. The past has lessons to teach, but it's the present where you apply those lessons. If you're stuck in what was, you'll never move toward what could be. Next, stop looking for validation from the people around you. We all want to be liked, appreciated, and validated by others. It's part of being human. But if you're constantly looking for approval from others, you're putting your sense of self-worth in their hands. And that's dangerous because people's opinions change. One day they like you, the next day they don't. If you tie your confidence to what others think of you, you'll always be at their mercy. True mental strength comes from within. It comes from knowing your own worth, regardless of whether others recognize it. When you're always seeking external validation, you're weakening your own sense of self. You're telling yourself that you're only as good as other people say you are. But strong people, they validate themselves. They set their own standards. They know that their value doesn't depend on external applause. They don't need someone else to tell them they're on the right path because they trust themselves. The more you rely on others for validation, the more you weaken your ability to stand strong in who you are. Next, don't give up too soon. Life is full of challenges, full of setbacks. That's a given. But here's where mental strength comes into play. Strong people don't quit when things get tough. They don't give up at the first sign of difficulty. Weakness, though, it makes you fold when things don't go as planned. It makes you think, maybe this wasn't meant to be. But the truth is, anything worth having is going to require perseverance. It's going to require pushing through the hard times. Weak people quit too early. They stop just when they're about to break through. Mental toughness is built by staying in the game, by weathering the storms, by refusing to give up when everything in you says it would be easier to walk away. Next, don't get too comfortable. We live in a world where convenience is king. We have technology that makes life easier, services that cater to our every need, and it's tempting to want to avoid discomfort at all costs. But here's the problem. Growth happens in discomfort. You don't build mental strength sitting in a place of ease. When you avoid discomfort, when you choose the path of least resistance, you're missing out on the very experiences that would toughen you up. You're shrinking your comfort zone instead of expanding it. And life doesn't reward the people who stay comfortable. It rewards those who are willing to endure discomfort in the pursuit of something greater. Think about it. Any worthwhile goal, any significant achievement, it requires stepping into the unknown, pushing through challenges, and facing fears. But if you get into the habit of avoiding discomfort, you'll never get there. You'll settle. You'll stay in your safe little bubble. And over time, that weakens you mentally. It makes you fragile. Because life isn't always going to be comfortable. And if you haven't trained yourself to handle discomfort, you'll crumble when real adversity strikes. Strong people don't avoid discomfort. They seek it out. They know that discomfort is a sign that they're growing, that they're pushing their limits. It's in those moments of discomfort that you discover what you're truly capable of. But if you make it a habit to avoid anything that makes you feel uneasy, you'll never tap into your full potential. Next, don't hold grudges. Now, this is a tough one because when someone wrongs us, it's natural to feel hurt, to feel angry. And sometimes we hold on to that anger, thinking that by doing so, we're punishing the other person. But here's the truth. Holding a grudge doesn't hurt the other person. It hurts you. It's like carrying a heavy weight on your back that grows heavier with time. And the longer you hold on to it, the more it drags you down. Mental strength isn't about ignoring what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to let go so that you can move forward. When you hold on to grudges, you're letting the past control you. You're allowing someone else's actions to dictate your emotions and your peace of mind. And that weakens you because it keeps you stuck in a negative state of mind. Strong people forgive, not because the other person necessarily deserves it, but because they deserve peace. They understand that forgiveness is a gift they give themselves. It's not about forgetting or condoning what happened. It's about freeing up mental and emotional energy that could be used for more productive things. But when you hold a grudge, when you let that anger fester, it saps your mental strength. It consumes you, and it leaves little room for anything else. So, if you want to be mentally strong, you've got to learn the art of letting go. Not for their sake, but for yours. Next, stop doubting yourself. We've all had moments of doubt. Those moments where you think, can I really do this? Am I good enough? What if I fail? But if you let doubt take over, if it becomes a habit, it will sabotage every effort you make. You see, doubt is like a virus that spreads. It starts with one little seed. Maybe someone said something negative about you, or maybe you didn't get the results you wanted. And from there, it grows. It makes you second guess yourself. It makes you hesitate. And in that hesitation, you lose momentum. You lose confidence. And before you know it, you're paralyzed and stuck in a loop of questioning your abilities and your worth. Strong people aren't free from self-doubt. They have those moments too. But here's the difference. They don't let it stop them. They recognize the doubt for what it is, a fleeting thought, not a permanent truth. They push through it, knowing that action is the antidote to doubt. The more you take action, the more you prove to yourself that you're capable, and the less power doubt has over you. But if you get into the habit of feeding your self-doubt, of giving it too much attention, it will weaken you. It will stop you from trying new things, from taking risks, from stepping into the unknown. And if you never step into the unknown, you never grow. You've got to learn to quiet that voice in your head that says you can't, and replace it with one that says you can. Because the truth is, you're stronger than you think, but you'll never know that if you keep letting self-doubt call the shots. Next, Don't focus too much on things you can't control. There's a lot in life that's outside of our control. The weather, the economy, other people's actions, and even some of the circumstances we find ourselves in. But here's the thing. If you spend your mental energy worrying about things you can't control, you're wasting that energy. You're weakening yourself because you're putting your focus on things that are outside of your influence. And the more you do that, the more you feel powerless. Like life is something that happens to you instead of something you create. Strong people focus on what they can control, their thoughts, their actions, their responses to whatever life throws at them. They don't waste time or energy trying to change things that are beyond their reach. They accept what they can't control and then direct their energy toward what they can. That's where mental strength is built. But when you get into the habit of obsessing over things that are outside of your control, you weaken your resolve. You're trying to fight battles that aren't yours to fight. And in doing so, you're draining yourself mentally. It's like trying to push a boulder uphill. It's exhausting, and it doesn't get you anywhere. So if you want to strengthen your mind, if you want to become the kind of person who can face anything with confidence and resilience, you've got to let go of what you can't control. Focus on what's within your power. Focus on your mindset, your actions, your habits. That's where your strength lies. That's where you have control. And that's how you build a mind that's tough, resilient, and unshakable. Every one of these habits I've talked about today, whether it's complaining, making excuses, seeking validation, or focusing on things outside your control, each one erodes your mental strength little by little. But the good news is, just as you can weaken your mind, you can also strengthen it. It's all about awareness and action. The more you become aware of these habits, the more you can catch yourself in the act and choose a different path. And the more you practice mental toughness, the stronger you become. Life will always throw challenges your way. That's a given. But whether those challenges break you or build you up depends on the habits you cultivate.